Stop scrolling right now because the Australian 10-cent coin you see every day could be hiding a serious secret. Most people think 10-cent coins are worthless, but collectors know better hidden. Among ordinary change are rare Australian 10-cent coins worth hundreds and in some cases thousands of dollars today. We are counting down the top 5 most valuable Australian 10-cent coins ever discovered. Coins made valuable by ultra-low mintages, rare composition changes, minting errors, and survival in near-perfect condition. Imagine finding a small silver-colored coin in your pocket that later pays for a vacation or becomes the centerpiece of a serious collection. From the famous early decimal issues to shocking error strikes and pristine examples that almost never survive circulation, each coin on this list has a story of luck, history, and demand colliding. Stay with me until the end because the number 1 Australian 10-cent coin is so rare and top grade that most Australians will never see one in real life, and once you know what to check, you will never look at 10-cent coins the same way again. Picture this: you are holding a small silver coin barely noticed by millions, passed from hand to hand in shops, pockets, and wallets across Australia in 1970, yet inside this 10-cent coin lives a powerful story of a nation finding its modern identity, a country stepping confidently onto the world stage, and a moment in history where tradition, innovation, politics, economics, and everyday life collided. This is not just a coin. This is a witness to a turning point in Australian history, and once you truly understand it, you will never look at Australian money the same way again, because the Australian 10-cent coin of 1970 was born from a revolution that reshaped how Australians thought about value, currency, and national pride. Only a few years earlier, Australia abandoned the old pounds, shillings, and pence system that had tied it closely to Britain for generations, and in February 1966, decimal currency arrived, bringing simplicity, clarity, and a bold statement that Australia was ready to define itself on its own terms. The 10-cent coin was part of that new vision: sleek, modern, and practical, designed for a fast-changing society, and by the time 1970 arrived, the 10-cent coin was no longer new, but it had become essential, a workhorse of everyday trade, reflecting the rhythm of daily Australian life. The 1970 10-cent coin carried the now iconic image of the lyrebird on its reverse, a masterful design by sculptor Stuart Devlin. The lyrebird was not chosen by accident. This bird is native to Australia, famous for its ability to mimic sounds from nature and human life, symbolizing adaptability, creativity, and resilience, qualities Australians saw in themselves. During a decade of enormous social change, the intricate feathers and poised stance of the lyrebird spoke of natural beauty and quiet strength, while the obverse bore the youthful portrait of Queen Elizabeth II, reminding Australians of their constitutional ties to the crown. Even as their national identity grew stronger, the coin itself was struck in cupro-nickel, a durable alloy chosen to withstand heavy circulation, because this coin was meant to work hard, just like the people who used it in 1970. Australia was experiencing economic growth, rising wages, expanding suburbs, and a population eager to enjoy new opportunities. 10 cents could buy everyday essentials. It could be part of a child's pocket money, dropped into jukeboxes, or saved carefully in jars and wallets. It was a coin of real value and real presence, minted in large numbers at the Royal Australian Mint in Canberra, which itself symbolized Australia's commitment to producing its own currency at home rather than relying on overseas mints. The year 1970 was significant. Beyond coinage, it sat at the dawn of a transformative decade. Australia was grappling with the Vietnam War, changing immigration policies, and the early rumblings of social reform. And while headlines focused on politics and protests, the 10-cent coin quietly circulated through it, all paying for newspapers, milk, bus fares, and small treats. It touched every layer of society, linking farmers, factory workers, office clerks, students, and shopkeepers in a shared economic experience. Today, collectors often overlook the 1970 10-cent coin because it is not rare in the traditional sense, yet its true value lies in its story and condition. Uncirculated examples reveal sharp details that bring Devlin's lyrebird to life, while circulated coins show the honest wear of history, each scratch mark and softened edge representing countless transactions and human moments. The 1970 issue also represents stability in Australian coin design, before later changes in portraits and subtle modifications, making it a snapshot of a specific era preserved in metal for modern audiences. This coin teaches us that history does not only live in museums or textbooks, it lives in objects we once considered ordinary and disposable. The Australian 10-cent coin of 1970 is a reminder that even the smallest denomination can carry the weight of a nation's journey from colonial roots to confident independence, and as we explore its origins, design, production, and role in everyday life, we uncover a deeper truth that money is more than value. It is memory, identity, and time captured in the palm of your hand, and that is why this humble coin deserves its story to be told in full. Because when you understand the 1970 Australian 10-cent coin, you understand a piece of Australia itself. Imagine holding a small silver-colored Australian 10-cent coin from 1975 in your hand and realizing that this quiet, ordinary piece of change has traveled through political change, economic pressure, royal tradition, industrial reform, and the everyday lives of millions of Australians. And as this story opens, you are not just looking at a coin, you are opening a time capsule that begins less than a decade after Australia abandoned pounds, shillings, and pence and stepped boldly into decimal currency, a moment that reshaped how a nation thought about money, value, and identity. And the 1975 10-cent coin sits right at the crossroads of that transformation, carrying with it the authority of the crown, the pride of a young modern nation, and the unseen fingerprints of history pressed into every reeded edge and every feather of the lyrebird. And to understand this coin fully, you have to go back to the mid-1960s when Australia decided to modernize its entire monetary system, a risky national gamble that demanded public education, new minting technology, and total trust from the population. And by the time 1975 arrived, decimal currency was no longer new, but it was still proving itself in the hands of workers, shopkeepers, children, and collectors, and the 10-cent coin had already become one of the most recognizable coins in circulation, valued not only for its purchasing power but for its durability, design, and its symbolism. And 1975 was not a quiet year in Australian history. It was one of the most dramatic political years the country had ever seen. With economic uncertainty, inflation, global oil shocks, and the unprecedented dismissal of a prime minister, and while headlines focused on power struggles and constitutional crisis, the Royal Australian Mint continued its work producing coins that would quietly pass through these turbulent times. And the 10-cent coin of 1975 became a silent witness to that chaos, moving through pockets during strikes, through cash registers during inflation, and across counters as prices crept upward. And when you look at the obverse of the coin, you see Queen Elizabeth II portrayed by Arnold Machin, a portrait that dominated Commonwealth coinage for decades, projecting stability, continuity, and royal authority at a time when the modern world seemed anything but stable. And this portrait was not chosen lightly. It was designed to balance tradition with realism, presenting the Queen not as an unreachable symbol, but as a steady presence in everyday life. And on the reverse, the iconic lyrebird, designed by Stuart Devlin, stands proud, wings partially spread, capturing movement, confidence, and a uniquely Australian spirit. And the lyrebird was more than decoration. It was a statement that Australia was defining itself on its own terms, celebrating native wildlife rather than inherited European symbols. And the coin itself was struck in copper nickel, an alloy chosen for strength, longevity, and resistance to wear, because this coin was meant to work hard to survive years of circulation in a growing economy. And millions of these coins were minted in 1975, reflecting the demands of commerce and the trust placed in physical currency at a time before digital payments and electronic banking, and every one of those coins carried the same weight, the same diameter, the same clean, sharp reeded edge design to help the visually impaired and prevent counterfeiting. And when you consider how many hands each coin passed through, you begin to understand how deeply woven this small object is into the fabric of daily life, from a child buying sweets after school to a commuter paying bus fare to a worker counting change at the end of a long shift, and over time as years turned into decades, the 1975 10-cent coin transitioned from everyday object to historical artifact, and collectors began to look closer, noticing differences in condition, strike quality, and preservation. And while it was never intended as a rare issue, its true value lies in context, in survival, and in story. Uncirculated examples preserve the sharp details of Devlin's design, while circulated coins tell their own stories through wear, softening the feathers of the lyrebird and smoothing the queen's portrait. And this coin also marks an era before commemorative overload, before constant design changes, when consistency itself was a statement, and the Royal Australian Mint focused on reliability rather than novelty. And as inflation eroded purchasing power over the years, the 10-cent coin bought less and less, yet it remained in circulation, a reminder of a time when 10 cents mattered, when coins were counted carefully and saved deliberately. And today, when you encounter a 1975 Australian 10-cent coin, you are not just seeing metal, you are seeing a survivor of economic reform, political drama, and social change, a coin that outlived governments, outlasted crises, and remained faithful to its purpose. And as this story continues deeper into minting practices, die production, quality control, distribution, and long-term collectability, you begin to realize that a 2-hour journey into the life of this coin is not excessive at all, because every detail opens another door into Australian history. And the real question is not why this coin matters, but how many stories are still locked inside it, waiting to be told. Imagine holding a small silver-colored coin in your hand, a coin most people overlook, a coin that passed quietly through millions of pockets in 2005 without anyone stopping to ask what story it was carrying. Now imagine that this single Australian 10-cent coin is not just money, but a time capsule, a witness to a turning point in Australia's modern identity, its economy, its culture, its wildlife, its technology, and its place in the world. This is not just the story of a coin, this is the story of Australia in the mid-2000s, told through metal design decisions, politics, minting technology, and the quiet power of everyday currency. The 2005 Australian 10-cent coin represents a nation confident, stable, and moving forward, yet deeply rooted in symbols chosen decades earlier, symbols that still spoke loudly in a rapidly changing world. When this coin was struck, Australia was experiencing economic strength. Household spending was rising, digital banking was expanding, and cash was beginning a slow transformation from necessity to convenience. Yet coins like the 10-cent remained essential, especially for transport, vending machines, small purchases, and daily life, making this coin one of the most handled objects in the country. And because of that, it became one of the most powerful storytellers. The 10-cent coin design, introduced back in 1966 after decimalization, continued unchanged in 2005, featuring the iconic platypus, one of the most unique animals on Earth, a creature so strange that when Europeans first saw it, they believed it was a hoax. The platypus on the reverse is not accidental. It represents Australia embracing its uniqueness, its isolation, its evolution, and its refusal to conform to expectations. And by 2005, that message mattered more than ever as Australia balanced tradition with globalization. On the obverse of the coin appears Queen Elizabeth II, portrayed in Ian Rank Broadley's effigy, a mature, dignified portrait that had been used since 1998, symbolizing continuity, stability, and constitutional monarchy at a time when Republican debates still echoed through Australian politics. The presence of the Queen on the 2005 10-cent coin was a reminder that Australia, while independent, Still honored its historical framework and legal foundations, the Royal Australian Mint in Canberra produced the 2005 10-cent coin using cupro-nickel, an alloy of 75% copper and 25% nickel, chosen for durability, corrosion resistance, and a consistent electromagnetic signature necessary for modern vending and coin-operated machines. Every technical detail of this coin was engineered for efficiency and longevity. Its diameter of just over 23 millimeters, its weight of 5.65 grams, and its reeded edge, all designed to make it instantly recognizable by touch and machine alike. In 2005, minting technology was more advanced than ever before, allowing for tighter tolerances, cleaner strikes, and greater consistency, meaning that the average 2005 10-cent coin often displays sharper details than earlier decades, yet that same precision also meant fewer dramatic errors, making genuine mint errors from this year especially valuable to collectors today. The mintage of the 2005 Australian 10-cent coin reached into the tens of millions, reflecting the high demand for circulating coinage at the time. Australia was growing its population, expanding its cities, and relying heavily on physical currency for everyday transactions. Despite the rise of cards and electronic payments, this coin jingled in pockets, rode buses, paid for parking meters, and bought school snacks, becoming part of the daily rhythm of Australian life culturally. 2005 was a fascinating year. Australia was confident on the world stage, its athletes, entertainers, and scientists gaining recognition globally, and the humble 10-cent coin quietly mirrored that confidence. It did not need flashy redesigns or commemorative markings. It stood firm, unchanged, reliable, and familiar, which in itself was a powerful statement that some symbols are strong enough to endure without alteration. Collectors today often underestimate the 2005 10-cent coin because it is not rare in the traditional sense, but rarity is not the only measure of significance. Condition scarcity plays a huge role, and finding a 2005 10-cent coin in uncirculated or mint state condition is far more difficult than many realize, especially with full luster, clean fields, and sharp platypus details. And when grading standards are applied, even a common date can become desirable and valuable, especially as future generations begin to look back at the early 21st century as a distinct historical era. The 2005 10-cent coin also exists within a broader narrative. Australian decimal coinage, a system introduced in 1966 that modernized the economy, simplified trade, and aligned Australia more closely with global markets. By 2005, that system had proven its success, and the 10-cent coin stood as one of its most balanced denominations, not too small to be ignored, not too large to be cumbersome. A perfect example of functional design meeting national symbolism. So when you look at a 2005 Australian 10-cent coin, you are not just looking at spare change, you are looking at a snapshot of a nation at ease with itself, a nation honoring its past, while confidently stepping into the future. A coin that did exactly what it was meant to do without demanding attention, and that quiet reliability is precisely what makes it powerful and worth telling it to our story about, because sometimes the most important history is hiding in plain sight, right there in the palm of your hand. Picture this: you are holding a small silver coin barely larger than a thumbnail, yet inside this Australian 10-cent coin from 2008 lives a story that stretches across centuries of power, trade, empire, technology, and national identity. A story that begins long before 2008, long before Australia even existed as a modern nation, and connects ancient metalworking traditions to modern global economics. This is not just spare change, this is a survivor of history, a witness to economic storms, political shifts, and the quiet everyday lives of millions of Australians. And today, we are going to slow time down and open that story layer by layer so deeply that by the end you will never look at a 10-cent coin the same way again. The Australian 10-cent coin is part of a lineage born in 1966 when Australia made one of the most dramatic economic changes in its history, abandoning pounds, shillings, and pence and stepping into the modern decimal system. This single decision reshaped how Australians thought about money value and daily life, and the 10-cent coin became a symbol of that new era, designed to be practical, durable, and instantly recognizable from the very beginning. It carried the image of the superb lyrebird, one of the most extraordinary birds on Earth, famous for its ability to mimic almost any sound, a living symbol of Australia itself, adaptable, resilient, and unmistakably unique. By the time we reach the year 2008, the world is standing on the edge of financial chaos. The global financial crisis is unfolding. Banks are collapsing, markets are panicking, and trust in institutions is being tested everywhere, including Australia. Yet quietly and consistently, the Royal Australian Mint continues its work, striking millions of coins, including the 2008 Australian 10-cent coin, each one created not for collectors at first, but for circulation, for everyday use, for buying bread, newspapers, fuel, and coffee during uncertain times. This coin becomes a silent companion to history, passing through countless hands during one of the most significant economic moments of the 21st century. The 2008 Australian 10-cent coin is struck in cupro-nickel, an alloy chosen not by accident, but through decades of experimentation, balancing durability, resistance to corrosion, and cost-effectiveness. This metal composition connects the coin to industrial science, mining, and global supply chains, stretching from Australian nickel resources to international metal markets. Every single coin represents mining operations, metallurgical research, transportation, logistics, and precision engineering, all coming together in one small object weighing exactly 5.65 grams with a diameter of 23.6 millimeters and a distinctive milled edge designed to be easily identified by touch, even in darkness. At the center of the coin stands the lyrebird, its tail feathers spread in an elegant fan, capturing motion, sound, and life in frozen metal. This design by Stuart Devlin has remained largely unchanged since the coin's first issue because it works so perfectly. The lyrebird is not aggressive or imperial. It does not represent conquest or royalty. Instead, it represents culture, nature, and creativity, traits deeply tied to the Australian identity. On the obverse of the 2008 coin appears the effigy of Queen Elizabeth II, designed by Ian Rank, broadly a portrait that reflects maturity, authority, and continuity, reminding us that Australia in 2008 remains a constitutional monarchy, even as it stands as a fully independent nation. What makes the 2008 issue particularly fascinating is its context, not just how it looks, but what was happening when it was made. Inflation was reshaping purchasing power, digital payments were beginning to rise, and discussions were already starting about the future relevance of small denomination coins. Yet millions of 10-cent coins were still needed, because physical money remained essential, especially during times of crisis when trust in digital systems could waver. The 2008 coin becomes a bridge between eras, one foot in traditional cash-based society and the other stepping toward a digital future from a collector's perspective. The 2008 Australian 10-cent coin is not rare in the traditional sense, with tens of millions minted, yet its value lies in condition, history, and story. Uncirculated examples preserved straight from mint rolls capture the exact moment they were created, untouched by time, while circulated examples tell richer stories, marked by scratches, wear, and tiny dents that record years of real-world use. Every mark is evidence of life: groceries bought, wages paid, parking meters fed, and hands exchanged across generations. When you zoom out even further, this coin becomes part of a global conversation about what money really is: a government-backed promise, a tool of trust, and a shared agreement among society. The 2008 Australian 10-cent coin functioned flawlessly in this role during a time when many financial systems were under strain. It never panicked, never defaulted, never changed its value on its face. It simply kept moving, passing quietly from person to person, doing its job. And that is why this coin matters, because history is not only written in documents and monuments, it is carried in pockets, drawers, and jars. The Australian 10-cent coin of 2008 is a working artifact, a piece of industrial art, and a witness to one of the most turbulent financial periods of modern history. It represents continuity, stability, and everyday resilience, and as we continue this deep dive, we will explore its minting process, comparisons with other years, hidden variations, collector myths, long-term value, and why coins like this still matter in a world racing toward cashless economies. This is not just a coin, this is Australia in metal, and this story is only just beginning. Imagine holding a small silver-colored coin in your hand and realizing that it carries the weight of an entire nation's story, a coin that most people spend without a second thought. Yet it quietly connects generations, from the birth of Australian decimal currency to the modern digital age, and today we are diving deep into the Australian 10-cent coin of 2014, a year that seems recent, but already stands as a fascinating chapter in Australia's monetary and cultural history. This is not just a coin, this is a symbol of continuity, identity, resilience, and everyday life, and as this story unfolds, you will see how a simple piece of metal reflects economic shifts, artistic mastery, national pride, and the invisible rhythm of millions of daily transactions across a vast continent. The Australian 10-cent coin was first introduced in 1966 when Australia made the bold move from pounds, shillings, and pence to a clean modern decimal system, a decision that reshaped commerce, education, and daily thinking for an entire population. And nearly 5 decades later, in 2014, that same denomination was still doing its quiet work and changed in size, design, and purpose, a rare example of stability in a world of constant redesigns and reforms. The 2014 10-cent coin continues the iconic platypus design created by renowned sculptor Stuart Devlin, a design so successful and so distinctly Australian that it has endured for generations. The platypus itself is no ordinary animal, it is one of the most unique creatures on Earth, a mammal that lays eggs with a duck-like bill-webbed feet, and a mysterious presence that once baffled European scientists. And by placing this creature on everyday currency, Australia made a powerful statement about embracing uniqueness and celebrating what makes the nation different. The reverse of the coin shows the platypus swimming calmly through stylized water lines, symbolizing balance, adaptability, and quiet strength, while the obverse in 2014 features the portrait of Queen Elizabeth II, designed by Ian Rank, broadly a portrait that represents continuity, authority, and the constitutional framework of modern Australia. This pairing of native wildlife and monarchy perfectly captures Australia's identity as an independent nation with deep historical roots. The 2014 issue was struck by the Royal Australian Mint in Canberra, an institution established to ensure Australia controlled its own coinage quality and supply, and by 2014 the Mint had decades of experience blending precision technology with traditional craftsmanship. These coins were produced in copper nickel, an alloy chosen for durability, resistance to corrosion, and a clean, consistent appearance, ensuring the coin could survive years of circulation in pockets, purses, vending machines, and cash registers across the country. The 10-cent coin measures just over 23 millimeters in diameter and weighs slightly more than 5 grams, dimensions that have remained constant since 1966, allowing machines and users alike to recognize it instantly without thought. In 2014, Australia was a nation balancing tradition and innovation. Contactless payments were rising, smartphones were becoming central to daily life, and yet physical currency still played a crucial role, especially small denomination coins like the 10-cent piece, which facilitated everyday transactions from public transport to groceries to school canteens. The continued minting of the 10-cent coin in 2014 shows how, even as technology advanced, society still relied on tangible money to function smoothly and inclusively for all age groups and communities. Collectors often overlook modern circulation coins, but the 2014 10-cent coin deserves Attention because it represents a mature phase of Australian decimal currency where design choices had proven themselves over time, errors were rare, quality was high, and production efficiency was refined while not a rare coin in circulated condition. Examples in uncirculated and proof forms showcase sharp details, brilliant luster, and the enduring beauty of Devlin's original artwork. For historians, this coin marks a period after the global financial crisis when Australia had demonstrated economic resilience and stability, and everyday coinage quietly reflected that confidence. Without fanfare, every 10-cent coin minted in 2014 passed through countless hands, telling silent stories of work, travel, leisure, and routine. It was used by children learning the value of money, tourists discovering Australia, locals buying coffee, and commuters topping up tickets. And though its monetary value is small, its cultural value is immense, because it is part of the shared daily experience of millions. The edge of the coin is milled, a practical feature designed to help visually impaired users distinguish denominations and to prevent slipping during handling. Another example of thoughtful design meeting real-world needs. When you look closely at a 2014 10-cent coin, you are not just seeing metal, you are seeing a bridge between past and present, a design born in the optimism of the 1960s, still relevant in the 21st century, and likely to continue well into the future. And that is the magic of this coin. It does not shout, it does not commemorate a single event or anniversary. Instead, it represents continuity, trust, and the quiet power of good design doing its job day after day, year after year. And as we continue this deep exploration, we will uncover how small variations, mint processes, collector interest, and economic context all add layers to this seemingly ordinary coin, proving once again that in the world of numismatics, there are no truly boring coins, only stories waiting to be told. Imagine holding a small silver-colored coin in your hand and realizing that this single piece of metal represents one of the biggest turning points in Australian history, a moment when an entire nation changed the way it counted money, thought about value, and stepped fully into the modern world. Because the Australian 10-cent coin of 1966 is not just spare change, it is the sound of cash registers being relearned, the anxiety of shopkeepers doing mental math, the excitement of school children jingling new coins in their pockets, and the quiet end of pounds, shillings, and pence, a system that had ruled Australian life since colonial times. And when this coin was released on February 14, 1966, it marked Decimal Day, a carefully planned national event that had been prepared for years with government campaigns, television ads, posters, pamphlets, and even special songs teaching Australians that 2 new cents equaled an old penny, and that 10 shillings became $1. And in the center of this historic shift sat the humble 10-cent coin, struck by the Royal Australian Mint in Canberra, a mint that itself symbolized national independence, because for the first time Australia was producing its own coins at home rather than relying on overseas mints. And the 1966 10-cent coin was made of 80% silver and 20% copper, giving it intrinsic metal value that today far exceeds its face value, a fact that would later cause millions of these coins to vanish from circulation, melted down by collectors, investors, and opportunists once silver prices rose, turning everyday money into hidden treasure. And the design itself tells a story, because on the obverse appears a young Queen Elizabeth II, designed by Arnold Machin, capturing a fresh modern monarch at the beginning of a long reign, while the reverse features the iconic Australian lyrebird, a master mimic of the natural world, symbolizing both the uniqueness of Australian wildlife and the idea of adaptation, perfectly fitting for a coin born during a time of massive change. And these coins were produced in astonishing numbers, with more than 40 million struck in 1966. Alone, ensuring that every Australian, from city bankers to rural farmers, would experience decimal currency firsthand. And yet, despite this high mintage, the survival rate of these coins in original condition is far lower than people expect, because heavy circulation, silver melting, and decades of handling wore them down, making high-grade examples, especially brilliant uncirculated pieces, surprisingly desirable today. And what makes this coin even more fascinating is that it represents a brief era that would never return, because after 1966, rising silver prices forced Australia to change the metal composition of its 10-cent coins in later years, meaning the original silver 10-cent piece became a one-year type for precious metal content, forever separating it from its successors and turning it into a bridge between old-world monetary tradition and modern base metal coinage. And for collectors, this coin becomes a gateway drug into Australian numismatics, because through it you can explore decimal changeover errors, mint marks, die varieties, strike quality, and the broader economic pressures of the 1960s, including global silver markets, inflation, and post-war growth. And for historians, it is a tangible artifact of social engineering on a national scale, where an entire population successfully relearned money almost overnight. And for everyday people, it remains a nostalgic symbol of a time when Australia confidently stepped forward into a new era. And in this video, we are not just looking at a 10-cent coin, we are uncovering the full story behind its creation, its design, its metal, its mintage, its survival, its modern value, and its lasting legacy. And by the end, you will understand why this small round piece of silver deserves hours of attention, because the 1966 Australian 10-cent coin is proof that sometimes the smallest objects carry the biggest stories. And as we go deeper into the story of the 1966 Australian 10-cent coin, we have to slow down and place ourselves in that exact moment in time, because this coin did not appear randomly. It arrived at the peak of post-war optimism, when Australia was growing fast, cities expanding, immigration booming, and confidence high, and the government understood that changing the currency was not just an economic move, but a psychological one. So planning began years earlier, with committees, mathematicians, economists, educators, and designers all working together to ensure that when decimal day arrived, chaos would not follow. And the 10-cent coin became one of the most important teaching tools in that transition, because it replaced the old shilling, which had been deeply embedded in daily language, prices, wages, and habits for generations. And suddenly 1 shilling was no longer a shilling, it was 10 cents, clean, simple, modern, and easy to divide. And that simplicity was revolutionary, and the Royal Australian Mint worked around the clock to strike enough coins to supply the entire nation, because on day one, shops, banks, buses, pubs, and households all needed new money at the same time. And the sound of silver 10-cent coins hitting counters echoed across the country as people tested the weight, the shine, and the unfamiliar feel. And many older Australians initially mistrusted the new coins, weighing them in their hands, suspicious that they were being cheated, while younger Australians embraced them, instantly seeing them as sleek, futuristic symbols of progress. And the 10-cent coin stood out because of its silver content, giving it a bright ring when dropped, a distinctive sound that collectors still recognize instantly today. And that sound is important because it reminds us that this was real money with real intrinsic value, not just a token, but a coin whose metal alone carried worth. And that fact would slowly change its destiny, because as the years passed and silver prices climbed, people began to realize that the 10-cent coin was worth more melted than spent. And that realization transformed millions of ordinary Australians into accidental hoarders, quietly pulling these coins from circulation and stashing them in jars, drawers, and safes, creating hidden silver reserves across the nation. And this behavior accelerated in the late 1960s and early 1970s, until the government was forced to abandon silver entirely for circulating coinage. And when that happened, the 1966 10-cent coin became frozen in time, a relic of a brief experiment when precious metal and everyday spending still overlapped. And collectors today study this coin not just for its date, but for its condition, strike, and luster, because finding one that escaped heavy circulation is increasingly difficult. And examples with sharp lyrebird feathers, full rim detail, and untouched fields tell a story of careful preservation or pure luck. And then there are the subtle variations. The differences in strike strength, the minute die characteristics that separate ordinary examples from premium pieces, and while this coin does not have dramatic error varieties, it does carry the quiet complexity that serious numismatists appreciate. Because its value is tied to both bullion markets and collector demand, making it a perfect case study in how coins operate at the intersection of history, economics, and human behavior. And when you place the 1966 10-cent coin beside later copper-nickel issues, the contrast is immediate, not just in color and weight, but in meaning, because the silver coin represents trust in metal, while later issues represent trust in systems, and that shift mirrors the broader global transition away from precious metals and into fiat currency. And that is why this small coin deserves extended attention, because through it we can explore how money evolves, how governments manage change, how citizens adapt, and how objects we overlook today can become treasured tomorrow. And as we continue this journey, we will break down production numbers, survival estimates, melt history, collector strategies, and real-world values, while connecting each detail back to the larger story of a nation. Stepping boldly into a new financial era, guided by a 10-cent coin that quietly changed everything.